I'm Maya Chen, and I'm about to face my family for the first time in 4 years. They have no idea what I've built since they cut me out of their lives. Tonight, they're celebrating my sister Sophia's engagement at what they think is just another trendy Manhattan restaurant. If only they knew the truth. My hands shake slightly as I smooth down my simple black dress. It's actually designer Tom Ford, but I chose it specifically because my family will assume it's from Target. They'll think I'm trying too hard with my limited budget. Perfect. Let me tell you where this story is going. And if you've ever had to prove yourself to people who should have believed in you from the start, drop a comment below. This one's for everyone who's been underestimated. Growing up as Maya Chen in Greenwich, Connecticut meant living under a microscope of expectations. My parents, Victoria and Robert Chen, weren't just wealthy. They were legacy wealthy. The kind of family where your worth was measured by your college acceptance letters and your salary figured in 6 digits. Our house was featured in Connecticut Magazine twice. My mother owned the most prestigious art gallery in town, and my father ran one of the most successful investment firms on the East Coast. Everything about our family was designed for show. Sunday dinners where we discussed market trends instead of how our week went. Charity galas where my mother would parade us kids around like trophies, each of us representing another facet of her perfect life. The Chen children are destined for greatness, she'd tell her friends, her accent still carrying traces of her parents' Korean heritage, though she spent decades trying to minimize it. Sophia, my older sister, was always the golden child. Yale Law, top of her class, now working at one of Manhattan's most prestigious firms. Tyler, my younger brother, followed the script perfectly to Harvard pre-med, already matching into neurosurgery programs that most people only dream about. Then there was me, the middle child who spent more time in our kitchen with our housekeeper, Rosa, than in the living room discussing stock portfolios. Rosa Santos was more than our housekeeper. She was my first teacher, though my parents never saw it that way. While they were networking at country club events, I was learning to fold dumplings and perfect the art of building layers in kimchi. Rosa's mother had taught her traditional Korean techniques, and she passed them on to me during lazy Sunday afternoons when the house was quiet. "You have the hands for this, Maya," she would say in her gentle mixture of Spanish and Korean phrases she picked up over the years. "The way you taste, the way you smell the food, this is a gift." By 13, I was creating fusion dishes that combined Rosa's Korean techniques with French methods I'd learned from cooking shows. By 16, I was sneaking friends over when my parents traveled, hosting elaborate dinner parties that felt more like home than any family gathering we'd ever had. But every time I mentioned culinary arts, my parents shut me down. "Cooking is service work," my father would say dismissively. "Chun's employ chefs. We don't become them." My mother was even more direct. "You want to throw away your education to be someone's help." The worst part was how they talked about Rosa when she wasn't around. "She's wonderful with Maya," my mother would tell her friends. "Keeps her busy with little projects in the kitchen." As if my passion was just a hobby to keep me occupied until I found a real direction. So I did what they expected. I applied to Wharton, got in, and spent 4 years studying business while secretly taking culinary courses at a community college in Philadelphia. My weekends were split between fraternity parties. My parents expected me to attend and underground pop-up restaurants I ran from my dorm room. I was living 2 completely different lives, and honestly, I was exhausted. The pop-up became legendary on campus. Students would find coded messages on bulletin boards. "Study group tonight. Room 412. Bring $25 for supplies." They'd show up to find my tiny dorm transformed into a 5-course tasting experience. I'd serve dishes like Korean short rib with French onion reduction or kimchi carbonara that somehow made perfect sense. Word spread beyond campus, and I was making enough money to fund my real education, the one happening in professional kitchens around the city. Every Sunday, I'd drive to Philadelphia's best restaurants and beg for unpaid stages. I'd work the line for free just to learn, coming back to campus with burns on my arms and flour under my fingernails. My parents thought I was studying in the library. Everything changed my senior year when celebrity chef Antonio Reyes came to campus for a lecture series. He was a legend, 3 Michelin stars, restaurants around the world, the kind of chef who could make or break careers with a single review. After his talk, there was a reception where local restaurants provided food. I convinced the catering coordinator to let me contribute one dish. Telling her I was part of the culinary club, I made Korean corn dogs with house-made kimchi and gochujang aioli. Sounds simple, but the technique was everything. The batter had to be perfect. The kimchi needed exactly the right level of fermentation, and the aioli required a balance that had taken me months to master. Chef Reyes tried it, paused, and tried it again. Then he found me. "Who made the Korean corn dogs?" he asked a group of students clustered around the food table. My heart was pounding as I raised my hand. He looked me up and down, business major, clearly not culinary school material, and frowned. "You made these?" "Yes, sir." "Where did you learn this technique?" "I taught myself. Books, videos, practice." He stared at me for what felt like forever. Then he handed me his card. "You're wasting your time in business school. Come to my kitchen in New York, I'll teach you properly." That card sat on my desk for 2 weeks while I wrestled with the biggest decision of my life. Everything my parents had planned for me, the business degree, the connections, the respectable career versus this crazy dream that kept me up at night, planning menus and perfecting techniques. Chose the dream. The conversation with my parents happened in our formal living room, the one we only use for important guests and serious discussions. I prepared what I was going to say, but standing there facing their disappointed faces, all my practice words disappeared. "I'm leaving Wharton," I said simply. "Chef Reyes offered me an externship at his restaurant in New York. I'm going to culinary school." The silence was devastating. My father set down his whiskey glass so carefully, I thought it might shatter from the tension. My mother's face went through about 5 different expressions before settling on cold disapproval. "Absolutely not," my father said finally. "We've invested everything in your education." "You've invested in the education you wanted me to have," I countered. "Not the one I need." My mother's voice was dangerously quiet. "If you pursue this hobby, you do it without our support, financial or otherwise." Sophia was home from law school that weekend. She actually laughed when I told them my plans. "Always the rebel," she said. "Let's see how long you last earning minimum wage in some kitchen." Tyler just looked embarrassed for me. He was already interning at prestigious investment firms, following the path perfectly. "Maya, be realistic," he said. "You have an opportunity here that most people would kill for." "I'm being realistic," I replied. "I'm being realistic about what actually makes me happy." My father stood up, his imposing figure casting a shadow across the Persian rug we'd had since I was a child. "You walk out that door to pursue this fantasy, and you're on your own. Don't come crawling back when reality hits." I left that night with 2 suitcases and $3,000 in savings. That was it. 4 years of college tuition, 2 decades of family. Relationships, gone because I wanted to follow my passion instead of their plan. The first year in New York was the hardest thing I'd ever experienced. I found a shared apartment in Queens, and I mean shared. 4 people, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen so small you couldn't open the refrigerator and the oven at the same time. My roommates were an aspiring actor, a freelance graphic designer, and a girl trying to make it as a fashion blogger. We were all broke, all struggling, all convinced we were going to make it somehow. My day started at 4:30 a.m. I'd take the subway into Manhattan for my prep cook job at a French bistro on the Upper East Side. The kind of place that served $30 salads to people who reminded me of my parents. I'd spend 6 hours chopping vegetables, making stocks, and learning knife skills from Lise, the sous chef who took pity on me because I was the only prep cook who actually wanted to learn instead of just collecting a paycheck from the bistro. I'd rushed to my second job as a line cook at a busy Italian place in Midtown. Different cuisine, different pace, but the same burning intensity that I'd fallen in love with. During dinner service, there was no time to think about anything except the orders coming in and the dishes going out. It was brutal and beautiful, and exactly where I belonged. Weekends, I worked at a high-end bakery in Soho, learning pastry techniques and the science behind bread making. By Sunday night, I'd collapse into bed with barely enough energy to shower off the flour and garlic that seemed permanently embedded under my nails. I was making about $1,200 a week across all 3 jobs, which in New York barely covered rent, food, and subway fare. I wore the same 3 pairs of work pants until they literally fell apart. I cut my own hair because salon visits weren't in the budget. I learned to make meals from whatever ingredients the restaurants were throwing away at the end of the day. But I was learning. Every day brought new techniques, new flavors, new ways of thinking about food. Luis taught me how to break down a whole fish in under 2 minutes. Maria at the Italian place showed me how to make pasta dough that was so smooth. It looked like silk. At the bakery, I learned the precise chemistry that turns flour and water into something magical. The hardest part wasn't the physical exhaustion or the financial stress, it was the loneliness. My parents had made good on their threat to cut off contact. Sophia was too busy with her law firm to return my calls. Tyler would text occasionally, usually just to ask if I was ready to come to my senses yet. I'd see my family's social media posts from charity galas and vacation trips, and it felt like watching a life I'd never really been part of anyway. 6 months into this routine, I hit my lowest point. I was walking home from the bakery on a Sunday night, exhausted and covered in flour, when I saw a group of my old college friends at a rooftop bar in Soho. They were celebrating someone's promotion at Goldman Sachs, drinking champagne that cost more than I made in a day. I watched them through the window, laughing and carefree, and for the first time, I wondered if my parents had been right. I called Tyler that night, something I hadn't done in months. When he answered, I could hear party sounds in the background. He was out with his med school friends, probably at some upscale place I could never afford anymore. Maya? He sounded surprised. Everything okay? I just wanted to hear a familiar voice, I said, trying not to sound as desperate as I felt. Are you ready to come home? Dad's been asking about you. For a moment, I almost said yes. The idea of going back to Greenwich, sleeping in my childhood bed, having meals appear in front of me without having to cook them after working 14 hours. It was tempting. But then I thought about the kitchen at the Italian place, the rush of dinner, service, the satisfaction of perfectly executing a dish I'd practiced hundreds of times. I thought about the notes I kept in my apartment, recipes and techniques I was developing, the dream of someday having my own kitchen. No, I said finally, I'm not ready to come home. I'm already there. Tyler was quiet for a moment. Maya, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. Yes, I do, I replied. I have to prove it to myself. That conversation marked a turning point. Instead of focusing on what I'd given up, I started focusing on what I was building. I began keeping a journal of every dish I made, every technique I learned, every failure and success. I started experimenting with fusion concepts that combined my Korean heritage with French techniques, creating dishes that felt authentically mine. The breakthrough came 18 months later. Chef Reyes, who had been mentoring me whenever his schedule allowed, was catering a private event for some major investors. He needed extra hands and asked me to help. The event was at a penthouse on the Upper East Side, the kind of place my parents would feel comfortable in. I was assigned to prepare a special course, my Korean short rib with French onion reduction, served over hand-cut noodles. It was a dish I'd been perfecting for months, one that represented everything I'd learned about balancing flavors and techniques from different culinary traditions. The guests included James Warren, a venture capitalist who specialized in restaurant investments. After dinner, He asked to meet the chef responsible for that course. Chef Reyes brought him to the kitchen, where I was cleaning up, still in my whites and sweating from the intense service. "You made the short rib?" James asked, looking skeptical. I was 24, Asian American, and looked more like a college student than a professional chef. "Yes, sir. Where did you train?" "Here," I said simply. "Chef Reyes has been teaching." "Me." James tried the dish again, slowly this time, really tasting each component. Then he asked me to walk him through my process, how I developed the recipe, why I'd made certain choices, what inspired the fusion of techniques. "You have something special here," he said finally. "Have you ever thought about having your own place?" That question changed everything. Within 6 months, James had introduced me to 2 other investors, and we found a space, a failed nightclub in Manhattan that needed complete renovation. I developed the concept for Meridian, a farm-to-table restaurant that would celebrate fusion cuisine, particularly Korean-American dishes elevated with French techniques. The 18 months between signing the lease and opening night were a blur. Of construction meetings, menu development, staff hiring, and permit applications. I learned about profit margins and food costs, wine programs, and front-of-house operations. All those business classes I'd taken at Wharton suddenly became relevant in ways I'd never expected. But the real work was in the kitchen. I spent months perfecting every dish on the menu, testing flavor combinations and presentation styles. I wanted Meridian to feel like the most sophisticated version of those underground dinner parties I'd hosted in college, intimate, unexpected, and completely delicious. We opened to incredible reviews. The New York Times gave us 3 stars in our first review, calling the menu a masterful blend of tradition and innovation. Food and Wine featured us as one of their best new restaurants, and reservations became impossible to get. 6 months after opening, we were profitable. 3 months after that, I used the restaurant's success to secure a loan and buy out my investors completely. At 26, I own one of Manhattan's most sought-after restaurants. Through all this, my family knew nothing. We maintained minimal contact, a few texts on birthdays, awkward phone calls where my mother would ask vague questions about my cooking work, before quickly changing the subject to Sophia's latest promotion or Tyler's medical school achievements. I kept my success private intentionally. Part of it was pride. I wanted to prove I could make it completely on my own. But part of it was protection. I worked too hard building this life to risk having it diminished by their judgment or their attempts to take credit. The invitation to Sophia's engagement dinner arrived at my apartment on a Tuesday morning. Heavy cardstock, elegant calligraphy, the kind of formal announcement my family specialized in. The location surprised me. Meridian. Of course, they didn't know it was my restaurant. They'd probably chosen it because it was exclusive and impressive, the perfect backdrop for their celebration. I stared at that invitation for days. 4 years of building a life they knew nothing about, and now they wanted to celebrate in the restaurant I created. The irony was almost too perfect. I decided to go. Not to seek their approval, I was long past needing that, but maybe to finally close this chapter. I was successful now, secure in what I built. I could face them without crumbling under their expectations. What I didn't anticipate was how it would feel to watch them critique my life's work while assuming I was still struggling to make ends meet. But that's exactly what I was about to experience, sitting at one of my own tables, pretending to be the family failure they'd always believed me to be. The plan was simple. Let them treat me exactly how they would if they thought I was still struggling, then reveal the truth. I wanted to see who they really were when they thought I had nothing to offer them. And honestly, I was curious to see their faces when they realized whose restaurant they'd been sitting in. I called David Kim, my restaurant manager, the day before the dinner. "I need you to treat me like a regular guest tomorrow night," I told him. "Don't acknowledge that I own the place until I give you the signal." David had worked with me since we opened. He understood immediately. "What's the signal?" "You'll know it when you see it." The night of the dinner, I stood outside Meridian for 10 minutes before going in. The restaurant looked beautiful. The lighting was perfect. The host stand was decorated with the seasonal flowers I'd chosen specifically for spring. And through the windows, I could see the elegant bustle of dinner service. Everything was exactly as I designed it. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. A simple black dress that was actually Tom Ford but looked understated. Enough that my family would assume it was from a department store. My jewelry was minimal, just my grandmother's pearl earrings and a watch. I wanted to look like I was trying to dress up for a special occasion on a limited budget. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the doors and walked into my own restaurant, ready to play the role of the family disappointment one last time. The familiar scent hit me immediately, the herbs from our kitchen, the subtle candle fragrance I'd chosen for the dining room, the faint aroma of the wine we served by the glass. Usually, these smells made me feel centered and proud. Tonight, they just made me nervous. Isabella Torres, my head server, spotted me immediately. Her eyes widened slightly in surprise. I rarely came through the front entrance as a guest. I gave her a subtle shake of my head and mouthed, "Not yet." From the hostess station, I could already see my family. They requested the center table. Naturally, my parents sat with the straight-back posture that had been drilled into all of us as children. My mother was in head-to-toe Chanel, her black hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite being in her 50s. My father examined the wine list with the exaggerated concentration of someone who wanted everyone to notice. He was making an important decision. Sophia looked radiant. In what I recognized as new season Gucci, her engagement ring catching the light every time she moved her hand. Next to her sat a man I didn't recognize, James Park, presumably, with slick back hair and a watch that probably cost more than most people's cars. Tyler had brought his wife, Jenny, both of them looking like they'd come straight from important professional obligations. "Good evening," said Carmen, our hostess. "Your party is already seated. May I show you to the table?" "Thank you," I murmured, following her across the dining room I designed from scratch. My mother noticed me first. Her eyes performed the quick scan I remembered from childhood head to toe, calculating the approximate value of my appearance, and finding it wanting. "Maya," she said, rising to give me air kisses that barely touched my cheeks, "you're finally here. We were beginning to wonder." "I'm exactly on time, Mother," I replied, checking my watch. 7:30 on the dot. My father stood, giving me the awkward hug that ended with a pat on the back that somehow felt both affectionate and dismissive. "You look healthy," he said, which in Chen family speak meant I gained weight and wasn't maintaining the borderline unhealthy thinness that was prized in our social circle. Sophia barely stood, offering her cheek for me to kiss. "This is James," she announced as her fiancé rose from his seat. His handshake was too firm, the kind of power move I recognized from business meetings. "Princeton undergrad, Wharton MBA," he introduced himself. "Just made junior partner at Goldman. No, nice to meet you, or I've heard so much about you. Just credentials." It was like he was handing me his resume instead of making conversation. Tyler gave me a warmer greeting, though his wife Jenny's smile seemed strained. I later learned she'd been the one responsible for securing this impossible reservation, and she was nervous about whether the restaurant would meet everyone's standards. "Well," my mother said as I took the last empty chair, "we've already ordered champagne. I hope that's all right." I noticed they'd chosen the Dom Perignon 2010 expensive, but not the most expensive option on our list. Classic Chen family move, impressive enough to show status, but not so extravagant as to seem reckless. Around us, Meridian hummed with the energy I'd worked so hard to create. The lighting was warm, but bright enough to appreciate the carefully plated dishes. The sound level was perfectly balanced, energetic enough to feel alive, quiet enough for intimate conversation. Every detail, from the weight of the silverware to the thread count of the napkins, had been my decision. I watched my staff move through their routines, noting the subtle glances they threw my way. Andre Baptiste, our sommelier approached with. The champagne, his eyebrows raising slightly in question. I gave him an almost imperceptible shake of my head. Excellent choice, he said to my father instead, presenting the bottle with practiced elegance. May I ask what you're celebrating? An engagement, my father announced, clearly hoping for special treatment. Congratulations, Andre replied smoothly. Meridian is honored to host such a special occasion. I'm surprised you managed to get a reservation here, I said innocently. I've heard it's nearly impossible. James leaned forward smugly. I have connections, he said with a wink that made me want to roll my eyes. Called in a favor with a client who knows the management, I bit my tongue. The client was probably Craig Winters, one of our regular investors who occasionally requested tables for business associates. I made a mental note to have a conversation with Craig about James later. Well, aren't you resourceful? I murmured, raising my champagne glass. To Sophia and James, my father declared. A perfect match and a brilliant future. We clinked glasses, and I took a small sip, noting that the champagne was served at exactly the temperature I'd trained my staff to maintain. As we settled in the conversation, I prepared myself for what I knew was coming, the inevitable interrogation about my life and career choices. But first, I wanted to see how they would treat my staff and my food when they thought I was just another struggling family member they were tolerating out of obligation. You're absolutely right about the word count. Let me continue with part 2, ensuring it's at least 8,000 words to complete the full story. So, Maya, my mother began, setting down her champagne glass with deliberate precision. Tell us what you've been up to these past few years. You've been so mysterious. The table's attention shifted to me like a spotlight. 5 pairs of eyes, all ready to judge whatever I was about to say. I could feel the familiar tightness in my chest, the same sensation I'd experienced during countless family dinners growing up. I've been working in food, I said simply, learning, growing, developing my skills. Sophia sighed audibly, as if I'd just admitted to a drug addiction. Still with that cooking phase? I honestly thought by now you'd have moved on to something more substantial. Not everyone can handle the corporate pressure, Tyler added, his tone managing to make his defense sound like an insult. The restaurant industry is different. James looked genuinely confused. What exactly do you do? Are you a line cook? Catering? Waitressing? Various roles, I answered vaguely, watching Isabella approach with our first course. I've worn many hats in the industry. Well, we're just glad you're managing to support yourself, my mother said, with the kind of forced graciousness that felt like a backhanded compliment. Though you know our door is always open if things become too challenging financially. Isabella arrived at our table, carrying a tray of what I knew were my signature amuse-bouche compresse, watermelon spheres topped with fermented black garlic and microgreens I'd sourced from an urban farm in Brooklyn. Each sphere represented hours of technique development and months of perfecting the balance of sweet and umami flavors. Compliments of the kitchen, Isabella announced, carefully placing one small spoon before each diner. Her eyes met mine briefly, a flash of recognition and loyalty before she slipped back into professional mode. Sophia examined the single bite with obvious disappointment. This is it. I'm starving. It's an amuse-bouche, I explained, a palate opener. The actual meal hasn't started yet. I know what an amuse-bouche is, Maya, Sophia snapped. I'm not culturally illiterate just because I chose law over playing with food. I watched as my family tasted my creation. My mother took the smallest possible bite, eternally conscious of calories. My father popped the entire thing in his mouth, without really tasting it. Tyler and Jenny seemed to appreciate the complexity, while James made a show of analyzing the flavors using wine-tasting terminology that made absolutely no culinary sense. Only, Sophia left hers completely untouched. I don't eat raw garlic, she declared, pushing the spoon away. The black garlic wasn't raw, it had been fermented for 60 days in a precisely controlled environment. A process I'd spent 3 years perfecting, but I didn't correct her. I just watched Isabella's face as she cleared the plates, noting the flash of disappointment when she saw Sophia's untouched creation. So tell us about the wedding plans, I said, deliberately shifting focus back to Sophia as our first course arrived. What came next was my heirloom. Tomato composition, a delicate arrangement of different tomato varieties with house-made ricotta and basil oil that had taken me months to perfect. The tomatoes had been selected that morning from a farm upstate that grew exclusively for high-end restaurants. Sophia brightened immediately at the attention. We've booked St. Thomas Church, of course. The reception will be at the plaza. Originally, we planned for 200 guests, but Mother thinks we should expand to 350. The guest list is becoming unwieldy, my mother interjected. The Ashfords aren't speaking to the Bennetts since that yacht incident last summer, so we can't seat them in the same section. And then there's the matter of the WINSTONS. I suppressed a smile at the gravity with which they discussed these social calculations. Some things never change. 400 seems excessive, I ventured, taking a bite of the tomato dish. James leaned forward, his expression serious. It's networking, not just celebration. Half those invitations are relationship investments. Precisely, my father agreed. James understands the social capital aspect of these events. And what about you, Maya? Sophia asked, her tone suddenly sharp. Any prospects on your horizon? Or are you still too busy with your cooking? I noticed she had barely touched her food, pushing the heirloom tomatoes around her plate with obvious disinterest. I'm focused on my career right now, I answered simply. Career, Tyler repeated with a small laugh that stung. Is that what we're calling it? My mother jumped in quickly. Maya, dear, surely at 26 you're thinking about settling down. There's that lovely Marcus Wellington Margaret Whitley's son. He's in hospital administration now. Very stable position. I'm not looking to be set up, Mother. Well, your options will become more limited with each passing year, she persisted, especially in your ... situation. Before I could respond, Isabella appeared to clear the first course. I had barely registered the taste of my own creation, too tense to properly enjoy it. Was there an issue with the dish? Isabella asked Sophia professionally, noting her nearly full plate. Too acidic, Sophia replied dismissively, and the tomatoes weren't quite ripe enough. I bit my tongue hard. Those tomatoes had been selected at their peak that very morning by farmers who understood exactly what we needed. They were perfect. I'm so sorry to hear that, Isabella said with practiced diplomacy. I'll be sure to inform the kitchen. The second course arrived: seared scallops with brown butter emulsion and pickled ramps, a spring special I was particularly proud of. The scallops had been delivered that morning, the ramps foraged from a specific location upstate where they grew wild. Now this looks more promising, my father declared, cutting into his scallop with his fork. James swirled the wine Andre had recommended for the pairing of Sancerre I had personally selected after tasting dozens of options. Decent wine list here. Not exceptional, but passable. Andre, overhearing this comment as he passed our table, caught my eye. I gave him a subtle smile that I hoped conveyed my amusement. Andre had been recruited from a 3 Michelin-starred restaurant in Paris and had turned down offers from establishments around the world to work with me. So, Maya, Jenny said, clearly trying to include me in the conversation. Ethan mentioned you're working in food, but what exactly do you do? Day to day? Before I could answer, Sophia cut in with a laugh. She's probably hostessing somewhere, right, Maya? Using that expensive business degree to seat people and hand out menus. Actually, I started. No shame in that, my father interrupted, his tone patronizing. Everyone has to start somewhere. Though after 4 years, I would have expected some advancement. I have advanced, I said quietly. Into what? Sophia pressed. Assistant manager at Applebee's? The table went quiet at her deliberate cruelty. Even Tyler looked uncomfortable. Sophia, he warned softly. What? I'm just being realistic. She chose to abandon her education for this passion project. Actions have consequences. I took a sip of the Sancerre, allowing the familiar notes to center me. The wine was perfect crisp, mineral, with just enough acidity to complement the scallops. "How is law treating you, Sophia?" I asked calmly, still at Henderson and Associates. Her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm between positions. At the moment, actually. Taking time to focus on wedding planning." "She was working too many hours," James interjected quickly. "I told her my wife doesn't need to kill herself at some law firm. Once we're married, she can focus on charity work, like my mother does." I caught the flash of something resentment, frustration, in Sophia's eyes before she smoothed her expression back to pleasant agreement. The third course arrived, hand-rolled. Tagliatelle with spring peas, pancetta, and mint. This was one of our signature dishes, featured in Food and Wine magazine just last month. I had rolled every strand of pasta by hand that morning, a meditative process that usually brought me peace. "The portion sizes here are ridiculous," my mother commented, examining the artfully plated pasta. "All this expense for what amounts to 3 bites." "It's about quality over quantity, Mother," I replied. "The tasting menu is designed to take you through multiple flavor profiles and textures. In my day, my father grumbled, restaurants gave. You a proper meal for your money. This nouvelle cuisine nonsense is just a way to charge more for less food." I watched James cut into his pasta with a knife, rather than twirling it properly, breaking the delicate strands I had spent hours perfecting. Each strand represented technique, patience, and care, and he was destroying it with his ignorance. "So," Sophia said, her voice taking on the prosecutorial tone she perfected in law school, "how exactly are you affording a place like this on a food service salary? This is one of the most expensive restaurants in the city." I felt all eyes turned to me again. The question I've been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "I manage my finances carefully," I replied. "Oh, please," Sophia scoffed. "A dinner here costs more than you probably make in a week. Who are you dating? Is some boyfriend paying for this?" "I'm not dating anyone." "Then how can you possibly afford this?" she pressed, her voice getting louder. "Are you in debt? Maxing out credit cards to keep up appearances?" "Sophia," Tyler warned again, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this was taking. "No, I want to know," she insisted, her voice carrying to nearby tables. We all rearranged our schedules for this dinner that she suggested at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Either she's being financially irresponsible, or she's not being honest about her situation. The fourth course arrived duck breast with cherry gastrique and farro, executed perfectly by Chef Carmela Santos, who ran my kitchen when I wasn't on the line. The duck was a perfect medium rare, the cherry sauce providing just the right amount of sweetness to balance the rich meat. James cut into his duck, examined it, and immediately frowned. "This is undercooked," he announced loudly. "I can't eat this." I looked at his plate. The duck was exactly as it should be, pink in the center, perfectly tender. "Duck breast is traditionally served medium rare," I explained calmly. "That's the optimal temperature for this cut." "I don't care what's traditional," James declared, motioning aggressively for Isabella. "I prefer my meat well done." When Isabella approached, he spoke without looking at her, treating her like furniture. "This is raw. Take it back and cook it properly." I saw the flash of annoyance in Isabella's eyes, quickly masked by professional courtesy. "Of course, sir. My apologies." As she took his plate, I caught her eye and gave the slightest nod. She would know to have the kitchen prepare a new breast rather than ruining the existing one by overcooking it. "Really, Maya," my mother said once Isabella had gone, "you still haven't answered Sophia's question. How are you affording this dinner?" The tension at the table was palpable now. I could feel the familiar sensation from childhood being cornered, judged, and found wanting before I'd even had a chance to defend myself. But I wasn't that insecure young woman anymore. I had built something extraordinary, something that was entirely mine. For a moment, I considered revealing everything right then, watching their expressions change as they realized whose restaurant they were sitting in, before I could decide. James's overcooked duck returned, now tough and dry, lacking all the tenderness and complexity it had originally possessed. "Much better," he declared after one bite, though I could see from across the table that it was now nearly inedible. My father signaled for the wine list again. "Let's order another bottle. Something more impressive this time." Andre approached with our leather-bound wine list, and my father made a show of examining it before pointing to one of our most expensive options, a 2010 Bordeaux priced at $800. "This should be adequate," he declared. I knew that bottle intimately. I had selected it during a buying trip to France, meeting with the vintner personally. It was spectacular, but completely wrong for the remaining courses. "May I suggest something that might pair better with the dessert course?" I ventured. My father waved me off dismissively. "I think I know wine, Maya." Andre caught my eye, silently asking for direction. I gave him a small nod. Let my father have his way. This wasn't worth fighting over. As we moved through the final savory course, and into dessert, a deconstructed lemon tart that was one of my personal favorites, the criticism continued. Every dish met with some complaint. Every attempt I made to contribute to conversation was somehow twisted into evidence of my failure. The lemon tart was a masterpiece of technique and creativity. Traditional lemon curd reconstructed as spheres, with crumbled shortbread, candied lemon zest, and microgreens that provided a surprising herbal note. It had taken me 6 months to perfect the spherification technique. "Too tart," my mother declared after one small bite. "Pretentious presentation," James added. Whatever happened to just serving a normal slice of pie? By the time coffee was served, I felt emotionally drained. The double burden of enduring my family's condescension while watching them carelessly critique my life's work was becoming unbearable. Then came the moment I've been both dreading and anticipating the check. David. Kim, my restaurant manager, approached with the black leather folder containing the bill. He placed it discreetly in the center of the table, his expression professionally neutral, though I caught the slight question in his eyes. My father reached for the check immediately, a reflex of patriarchal obligation, but James intercepted it. With smooth confidence, "Please, Robert, allow me," he said. "Consider it my treat to celebrate this wonderful occasion." My father made the expected token protest before acquiescing with a gracious nod. I watched as James opened the folder, his confident smile faltering as he registered the total. A dinner for 7 with premium wine pairings, special preparations, and that $800 Bordeaux would run well over $3,000. "Is there a problem?" my father asked, noticing James's expression. No, James recovered quickly, though I could see sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Just confirming the details. He reached for his wallet, extracting a black American Express card with deliberate slowness, making sure everyone noticed the exclusive metal. Sophia, perhaps sensing his discomfort, chose that moment to return to her earlier interrogation. "So, Maya," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "you never did explain how you're managing to contribute to this extravagant evening. We wouldn't want you overextending yourself financially on our account." All eyes turned to me again. The familiar dynamic was asserting itself. Sophia, the successful one, me, the struggling disappointment. "I can cover my portion," I said simply. "Can you, though?" she pressed, leaning forward like a prosecutor closing in on a witness. "Because we all know what food service pays. Can you honestly afford a place like this?" The table fell silent. The question hung in the air, so deliberately insulting that even my parents looked uncomfortable. "Sophia," my mother murmured softly. "Perhaps this isn't—" "No, I want to know," Sophia interrupted, her eyes locked on mine. "We've spent the entire evening pretending that everything's fine, that Maya's decision to throw away her education hasn't left her struggling. I think we deserve some honesty." I felt heat rising from my chest to my face. 4 years of distance, of building my own life and success, and nothing had changed. I was still the family disappointment, still being asked to justify my existence. James, perhaps sensing an opportunity to deflect attention from his own discomfort with the bill, joined in. If you need help with your portion, just say so. There's no shame in accepting family assistance. I don't need help, I said, my voice tight. Then how exactly are you paying for this? Sophia demanded, her voice loud enough that other diners were beginning to notice. A meal here costs more than you probably make in a month. I opened my mouth to respond, to finally reveal everything, when James suddenly frowned at the bill in his hands. Wait, he said, his voice uncertain. There's something wrong here. They've only charged us for the wines, not the food. He looked up, confusion and relief warring on his face. There must be some mistake. James signaled sharply for David, who approached our table with perfect timing, as though he'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Excuse me, James said, holding up the bill. There's an error here. You've only charged us for beverages, not for the meal. David looked at the check, then at me, his expression carefully neutral but questioning. In that moment, I made my decision. The charade had gone on long enough. I gave David the slightest nod. There's no error, sir, David said smoothly, his professional demeanor giving way to warmth as he looked at me. The dinner has been taken care of. By whom? My father asked, frowning. David turned to me fully, his smile genuine now. Welcome back, Miss Chen. Your usual table for the investors' meeting is ready whenever you are. Should I handle this first? The silence that fell over our table was absolute. 6 pairs of eyes turned to me in various stages of confusion, shock, and dawning understanding. Thank you, David, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Please close out Mr. Park's beverage tab. The rest is complimentary, as usual. Very good, Miss Chen, David replied, taking the folder from James's slack grip. Also, Chef Santos mentioned she'd like your input on tomorrow's special menu when you have a moment. And your publisher called about the cookbook photo shoot. They've confirmed next Thursday. I'll stop by the kitchen before my meeting, I assured him as David departed. I finally looked directly at my family. Their expressions ranged from confusion to shock to the first glimmering of understanding. Double quotes. What just happened? My mother managed. I took a deep breath, feeling strangely calm now that the moment had arrived. Welcome to Meridian, I said simply. My restaurant. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. My father was the first to recover, his businessman's mind immediately shifting into calculation mode. Your restaurant, he repeated carefully. You work here. No, father, I clarified, feeling a strange sense of liberation. I own Meridian. I'm the executive chef and sole proprietor. That's impossible, Sophia blurted, her voice higher than usual. This is one of the most successful restaurants in the city. It's been featured in major publications. Yes, I agreed calmly. Food and Wine featured us as one of the best new restaurants last year. Bon Appetit gave us their Rising Star Award. The New York Times gave us their highest rating just 6 months ago. James was staring at me as though I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. But you said you worked in food service. You were so vague about everything. Because I wanted to see how you would treat me if you thought I was struggling, I explained, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. And you've all made that abundantly clear tonight. My mother's hand fluttered to her pearls, her signature gesture when socially destabilized. Darling, why wouldn't you tell us about this incredible achievement? The way she emphasized achievement spoke volumes. Success made my choices retroactively acceptable in a way that passion alone never could. Would you like the full story? I asked, looking around the table. Without waiting for an answer, I continued. After I left 4 years ago, I moved to the city with what little savings I had. For the first 2 years, I worked 3 jobs: prep cook, line cook, and weekend shifts at a bakery. I lived in a shared apartment in Queens with 3 roommates. I slept 4 hours a night and studied culinary techniques in whatever free time I had. I took a sip of water, noting their increasingly uncomfortable expressions. I worked under some of the best chefs in the city, learning everything I could. Then I met James Warren. He's a venture capitalist who specializes in restaurant investments. He tasted my food at a private event and asked if I'd ever considered having my own place. Tyler was listening intently now, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by what looked like genuine interest. 3 years ago, James became my first investor. We found this space. It was a failed nightclub at the time. I developed the entire concept, designed every aspect of the menu, hired all the staff, oversaw the renovation from the ground up. But the cost, my father said, his mind still apparently stuck on the financial aspects. A restaurant of this caliber, in this location, it must have required millions. $3.2 million for the initial investment, I confirmed. James brought in 2 other investors initially. We opened to immediate critical acclaim, partly due to my mentors, endorsement, and industry connections. 6 months in, we were profitable. 1 year later, I bought out all my investors. I've been the sole owner for over 2 years now. That's why you suggested we meet here, Sophia said slowly, realization dawning. You knew all along. Actually, no, I corrected her. Jenny chose this restaurant. Didn't you, Jenny? All eyes turned to Tyler's wife, who had been sitting quietly through most of the evening. She blushed deeply. I had no idea it was yours, Maya, she said quickly. The concierge at Tyler's hospital recommended it as the most prestigious new restaurant in the city. I swear I didn't know. Of course you didn't, I assured her gently. No one in the family knew. That was deliberate. But why keep it secret? My mother pressed, her voice taking on that coaxing tone she used when trying to manage social situations. We're your family. We would have been so proud. I couldn't help the sharp laugh that escaped me. Would you have been? The same family. Who called cooking servants' work? Who cut me off completely when I chose culinary school over the MBA program? Who just spent the entire evening making snide comments about my life choices while eating food I created? At that moment, Chef Santos approached our table. Carmela was an impressive figure in her pristine whites, with Chef de Cuisine embroidered on her jacket. She'd worked at some of the most prestigious restaurants in Europe before I convinced her to join Meridian. Sorry to interrupt, Maya, she said, but the Henderson party has arrived for their anniversary tasting, and that food critic from the Times wants to confirm his reservation for next week. Also, your literary agent called about the cookbook tour. They need your availability for the television appearances. I nodded professionally. Thank you, Carmela. Please tell them I'll be there in just a few minutes. As Carmela departed, I registered the growing amazement on my family's faces. Cookbook? Sophia echoed weakly. Coming out this fall with a major publisher, I confirmed. 150 recipes with personal stories about Korean American fusion cuisine. Maya, my mother began, her voice taking on that managing tone again. This is all so impressive. Why didn't you trust us with this information sooner? We could have helped, supported you. The way you supported me when I needed it most, I asked quietly. By cutting me off completely? We thought it was a phase, my father protested. How? Were we supposed to know you had this level of entrepreneurial vision? I felt a flash of anger at his attempt to reframe my success in terms he could understand and take credit for. I built this myself, I said firmly. Without your connections, your money, or your approval. James, who had been suspiciously quiet since the revelation, suddenly perked up with renewed interest. A cookbook deal must come with a substantial advance, he said, his tone shifting to business mode. And this place, he gestured around appreciatively, his earlier criticisms, apparently forgotten, It must generate significant revenue. Have you considered expansion? I have contacts in hospitality investment who might be very interested in a restaurant group concept. I couldn't help but laugh at the transparent shift from condescension to networking opportunity. I'm quite satisfied with my current advisors, I said coolly. But thank you for the offer. Sophia shot James a look of irritation before turning back to me, her expression complex. So all this time, she said, her voice tight, while I thought you were struggling, you were actually succeeding, building all this. Yes. And tonight, she continued, her voice hardening, you let us sit here criticizing your food, your wine selection, your staff, your restaurant, all while knowing it was yours. I wanted to see how you would treat me if you thought I was still the family failure, I explained. And frankly, I got exactly the answer I expected. That seems manipulative, she snapped, but I could see the embarrassment behind her anger. More manipulative than asking how I could afford to eat here, than suggesting I must be in debt or dating someone wealthy. I countered. You weren't concerned about me, Sophia. You were enjoying what you thought was your superiority. The restaurant had gradually emptied around us as the evening wound down. Andre approached with a special bottle. Your private reserve cognac, Miss Chen, he said, for after your investors' meeting. And Chef Santos says the kitchen is ready for your input whenever you are. Thank you, Andre, I replied. Please let Carmela know I'll be there in 10 minutes. As he left, I turned back to my stunned family. I have a business to run, I said, rising from my seat. Thank you for coming this evening. Maya, wait, my mother said quickly, reaching out as if to stop me. Don't leave like this. We should celebrate your success properly. Perhaps we could. All have brunch this weekend? Really catch up. I looked at her, seeing for perhaps the first time not the intimidating figure of my childhood, but simply a woman trying to salvage her social position and family dynamics. I'll consider it, I said. But right now, I have investors waiting. In a kitchen to oversee. As I turned to leave, Tyler stood up. Maya, he said, his voice quieter and more sincere than I'd heard all evening. For what it's worth, this is incredible. What you've built here, it's remarkable. I'm sorry we didn't support you sooner. I'm sorry I didn't support you. Of all the reactions tonight, his felt the most genuine. I gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. Thank you, Tyler. That means something. I have barely made it 10 steps when I heard the click of heels behind me. Turning, I found my mother hurrying to catch up, her perfectly composed facade beginning to crack. Maya, please, she said, lowering her voice. You can't just drop this revelation and walk away. We need to discuss this as a family. I glanced toward the private dining room where my actual investors were waiting. A group of successful restaurateurs and food industry veterans who were discussing funding for my second location. I have a meeting, Mother. These are business commitments I made months ago. Postpone it, she insisted. This is family. Family hasn't been a priority for any of you in 4 years, I replied, keeping my voice steady. My business commitments don't suddenly become optional because you've finally decided my career is worthy of your attention. The rest of the family have followed her, creating an awkward cluster near our bar area. My father looked distinctly uncomfortable. He wasn't used to situations he couldn't control through authority or money. Perhaps we could continue this conversation tomorrow, he suggested in his problem-solving business tone. Dinner at the house. We have a lot to catch up on, including how we might help you expand this success. James added eagerly, apparently unable to stop himself from networking. My firm specializes in... I don't need your help, I interrupted firmly. I didn't build this place to finally win your approval. I'd build it because this is what I love, what I'm passionate about, what I'm genuinely good at. The fact that it's successful doesn't suddenly make my passion more valid than it was 4 years ago. No one is saying that, darling, my mother backpedaled. Quickly. Aren't you? I asked, Are you proud of what I've accomplished, Mother? Or are you relieved that my choices no longer embarrass you socially? Her slight flinch told me I'd hit close to home. That's unfair, my father interjected, stepping into his protective mode. No, I corrected him. What's unfair is expecting me to pretend that your conditional love and support feels the same as unconditional acceptance would have. David appeared at my side, his presence a welcome anchor. The Morrison Group is asking if you'll be joining them soon, he said quietly, referring to my investors by their code name. 2 minutes, I promise. As David stepped away, I turned back to my family one final time. I need to go. I have people waiting who believed in my vision when it was just an idea, who supported me when I had nothing but potential. Maya, Sophia stepped forward, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge for the first time all evening. I owe you an apology. The things I said tonight, they were cruel and unfair. They were honest, I replied. And honestly, that's the silver lining of this entire evening. I got to see exactly how all of you view me when you think I'm struggling. That's not fair, Tyler said, joining the conversation. People make judgments based on limited information. We didn't know about any of this. You didn't know I was successful, I clarified. But you knew I was pursuing something I was passionate about. That should have been enough for my family to show basic respect and support. A heavy silence fell over the group. You're right, my father said finally, the admission clearly difficult for him. Richard Chen didn't acknowledge mistakes easily. We should have supported your passion regardless of its financial outcome. Coming from him, this was significant. So where do we go from here? My mother asked, genuine uncertainty in her voice, another rarity. I took a deep breath, considering the question carefully. Despite everything, these people were my family. The hurt they caused was real and deep, but so was our shared history. Complete estrangement had never been my goal, just enough distance to build my own life without their judgment, constantly clouding my decisions. I don't know yet, I answered honestly, but tonight has made one thing absolutely clear. If we're going to have any relationship moving forward, it needs to be on completely different terms. I'm not the family failure seeking redemption anymore. I'm a successful chef and business owner who deserves the same respect you'd show any other professional. Of course, my father agreed quickly. And that means no more comments about my life choices, no more unsolicited career advice, and absolutely no attempts to network through my restaurant. I added with a pointed look at James, who had the grace to look embarrassed. What about Sophia's wedding? My mother asked tentatively. What about it? We'd still like you to be there, Sophia said, her voice softer than I'd heard it all evening. As my sister, not as whatever we mistakenly thought you were before tonight. I looked at her carefully, trying to see past the years of competition and judgment to the sister I'd once shared secrets and inside jokes with. I'll be there, I promised. Then, after a moment's consideration, I added, and if you'd like, I could host a rehearsal dinner here at Meridian. As my wedding gift to you. Sophia's eyes widened. You would do that? After how we've treated you tonight. You're still my sister, I said simply. But to be clear, this isn't me seeking your approval or trying to buy my way back into the family's good graces. It's me offering something I'm proud of, on my own terms. I understand, she said quietly, and I would be honored. For the first time all evening, a genuine smile passed between us. Now, I really do need to go, I said, gesturing toward the private dining room where my meeting was waiting. Of course, my father nodded. Your business comes first. Not always. I corrected him. But tonight, yes. As they gathered their things to leave, I added, I'm free for brunch on Sunday. Not at your club, though. There's a small Korean place in Queens I think you should experience. The owner reminds me a lot of Rosa. She cooks with heart, not just technique. We'll be there, my mother promised. Looking relieved at this small opening, I watched them file out of my restaurant, Their entire understanding of our family dynamics irrevocably changed. As the door closed behind him, I let out a long breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding. Carmela appeared at my side. "Everything okay, Chef?" "Getting there," I replied, feeling oddly lighter despite the emotional intensity of the evening. "Family is complicated. Tell me about it," she laughed. "My mother still introduces me as her daughter who plays around. In restaurant kitchens, like I'm a teenager working part-time at McDonald's." I smiled, grateful for her understanding. "Let's go talk to the investors. I have some new ideas about the second location that I'm excited to share." As we walked toward my private dining room toward my real business, my chosen family of colleagues and collaborators who had believed in me when I was just a girl with a dream and a willingness to work harder than anyone else, I realized something important. The most significant revelation of the evening wasn't showing my biological family what I'd built. It was fully recognizing and owning my success myself. I had created this empire on my own terms, regardless of their approval or understanding. That knowledge was worth more than any validation they could ever offer. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in that same dining room, but this time for a very different kind of meeting. My publisher, my literary agent, and my cookbook photographer were spread around the table, planning the marketing campaign for Meridian, a journey through Korean-American fusion. The book was beautiful, over 300 pages of recipes, photography, and personal stories about finding my culinary identity. The cover featured a stunning image of my signature dish, Korean short rib with French onion reduction, plated with the same precision I brought to every aspect of my restaurant. The early reviews have been incredible. My agent, Sarah Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, was saying as she scrolled through her tablet. Publishers Weekly called it a masterful blend of memoir and cookbook that will resonate with anyone who's ever had to choose between family expectations and personal dreams. The pre-orders are already exceeding our projections, added Marcus from my publishing house. "We're looking at a potential bestseller here, Maya. The food world is taking notice." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Just saw the Times review of your cookbook. Mom cried reading it. In a good way, I think. See you Sunday." For brunch? That Sunday brunch had become a weekly tradition. My parents, Tyler and Jenny, would drive down from Connecticut to join me at Kim's Kitchen, a tiny Korean restaurant in Flushing, run by an elderly woman who reminded me so much of Rosa it sometimes took my breath away. The first few brunches had been awkward, filled with careful conversations and tentative attempts at rebuilding relationships. But gradually, something genuine began to emerge. My parents started asking real questions about my work, not just the financial aspects, but the creative process, the challenges of managing staff, the satisfaction of seeing a concept through from idea to execution. Tyler had even started cooking. More at home, texting me photos of his attempts at Korean fusion dishes with requests for feedback. His knife skills were terrible, but his enthusiasm was infectious. "The Netflix deal is almost finalized," my agent continued, pulling me back to the present meeting. "They want to do a 6-episode series about young entrepreneurs in the food industry. You be the featured chef, and they want to film here at Meridian as well as document the opening of your second location." The second location. That had been the topic of endless meetings and planning sessions over the past year. After much consideration, I decided to open in Los Angeles, a completely different food scene that would challenge me in new ways. "Any word on the James Beard nomination?" asked David, who joined us for this portion of the meeting. "Announcements come out next week," I replied, trying not to think too hard about it. Being nominated for Outstanding Chef would be incredible, but I'd learned not to pin my self-worth on external recognition. After the meeting ended and my team dispersed, I found myself alone in the restaurant for the first time in days. It was that quiet hour between lunch service and dinner prep when the space felt most peaceful. I walked through the dining room, straightening already perfect place settings and adjusting the flowers Isabella arranged fresh each morning. My Phone rang Sophia's name, appearing on the screen. "Hey," I answered. "Are you busy? I'm walking past your place and thought I might stop in for a coffee." "Come on up," I said, curious. Sophia had been in the restaurant several times since that first revelatory dinner, but usually with advance notice and specific purposes, dress fittings for her wedding, family birthday celebrations, or business. Meals with James's colleagues. She appeared 5 minutes later, looking unusually casual in jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual professional armor. "This is unexpected," I said, gesturing for her to sit at my favorite corner table. "I had a meeting in the neighborhood," she explained, then paused. "Actually, that's not entirely true. I walked 20 blocks out of my way to come here." Isabella appeared with coffee for both of us without being asked. My staff had learned to read our family dynamics with impressive accuracy. "What's on your mind?" I asked, settling across from her. Sophia wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, a gesture I remember from childhood when she was nervous about something. "I've been thinking about that dinner 3 weeks ago," she began slowly, "about the things I said to you." "We've talked about this, Sophia." The apology was appreciated. "No, let me finish," she insisted. "I've been thinking about why I said those things, and I realized something uncomfortable about myself." I waited, sensing this was important. "I was jealous," she admitted, the words coming out in a rush. "Not of your success. I mean, yes, that too, but of your courage. You walked away from everything safe and predictable to pursue something you actually cared about. And I've never done that." This was not the conversation I'd expected. "Sophia, you're incredibly successful. You're a lawyer at one of the most prestigious firms in the city." "Was," she corrected. "I haven't been entirely honest about why I left Henderson and Associates." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath. "I didn't leave to focus on wedding planning. I was asked to leave. I've been having panic attacks during client meetings, missing deadlines, making mistakes I'd never made before. My supervisor suggested I take some time to reassess my priorities. I had no idea. No one does. Even James thinks I chose to leave. I've been pretending to be this successful lawyer while actually having no idea what I want to do with my life." The vulnerability in her voice was startling. This was a side of Sophia I hadn't seen since we were children. "How long has this been going on?" I asked gently. "The panic attack started about a year ago, but honestly, I think I've been unhappy in law for much longer than that. I just didn't know how to admit it, especially after watching what happened to you when you changed directions." "What do you mean?" "You were so brave, Maya. You risked everything to follow your passion. And our parents, they were so angry, so disappointed. I was terrified of facing that same judgment." I reached across the table and took her hand. "So you stayed in a career that was making you miserable?" "Until it made me too miserable to function," she confirmed with a bitter laugh. "Ironic, isn't it? I criticized you for throwing away your education, and now I'm the one who can't handle the career I trained for." "That's not the same thing, Ed." "Oh," I protested, "you're not throwing anything away. You're recognizing that your first choice might not be your final choice. That takes wisdom, not weakness." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "How do you do it? How do you have the courage to disappoint people?" I considered the question carefully. I guess I had to decide what was worse, disappointing others or disappointing myself. And for me, disappointing myself felt like dying a little bit each day. "I feel like I'm dying a little bit each day now," she whispered. "Then maybe it's time to make a change. But I don't know what I want to do instead." "You always knew you wanted to cook." "I don't have that clarity. I didn't always know," I corrected her. "I knew I loved cooking, but I had no idea it could become this. I just knew I couldn't pretend to be happy doing something that felt wrong for me." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the weight of this conversation. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually. "Of course." "That night, when you revealed this was your restaurant, were you trying to humiliate us?" I shook my head. I was trying to see who you really were, all of you. I needed to know if the family relationships were worth rebuilding, or if I should just focus on the life I created. And what did you decide? That you're all flawed humans, just like me. But that doesn't mean we can't do better moving forward. She smiled for the first time since arriving. I'd like to do better. What would that look like for you? I don't know yet. Maybe taking some time to figure out what actually interests me instead of what looks impressive to other people. Maybe traveling, trying different things, seeing what feels right. That sounds terrifying and wonderful, I said honestly. James won't understand, she said, the worry creeping back into her voice. Then maybe James isn't the right person for you to be marrying. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Maya, I can't. We're getting married in 6 months. Everything's planned. So, plans can be changed. Deposits can be lost. The question is whether you're marrying James because you love him and want to build a life with him, or because calling off the wedding feels scarier than going through with it. That's not fair, she protested, but without real conviction. Isn't it? You just told me you've been living a lie about your career because you were afraid of disappointing people. Are you planning to do the same with your marriage? The question hung between us like a challenge. I don't know, she admitted finally. I don't know anything anymore. That's actually progress, I said gently. Admitting you don't know is the first step toward figuring out what you do know. She stayed for another hour, and we talked about everything: childhood memories, family dynamics, dreams we'd abandoned, and dreams we'd never dared to voice. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, maybe ever. As she was preparing to leave, she turned back to me with a thoughtful expression. You know what's funny? I always thought you were the rebellious one, the one who couldn't follow the rules. But really, you were just the one who was brave enough to be honest about what you wanted. And you were the one who followed all the rules perfectly, even when they were making you miserable, I replied. Neither approach is inherently right or wrong. The key is being conscious about which one you're choosing. And why? After she left, I found myself reflecting on how much our family dynamic had shifted in just a few weeks. The revelation about my restaurant had been a catalyst, but the real changes were happening in these quieter moments, conversations, where we were actually listening to each other instead of just waiting for our turn to judge or defend. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Saw the cookbook review in Food and Wine. Your father and I are so proud. See you Sunday? I smiled, typing back. Wouldn't miss it. The Sunday brunches had become something I genuinely looked forward to. Last week, my mother had surprised everyone by asking Mrs. Kim to teach her how to make kimchi. She'd taken notes in her precise handwriting, asking detailed questions about fermentation times and spice levels. My father had rolled his eyes at first, but by the end of the lesson, he was tasting different versions and offering opinions on which batch had the best balance of flavors. Tyler had brought his guitar that day, and we'd ended up having an impromptu sing-along in the restaurant's back garden. Jenny had a beautiful voice that we'd never heard before, and she taught us harmony parts to songs from her childhood in the Philippines. For the first time since I could remember, we felt like a family instead of a collection of individuals competing for approval. The changes weren't dramatic or immediate, but they were real. My parents were learning to ask questions instead of making assumptions. Tyler was sharing more about his own struggles with medical school pressure. Even James, when he occasionally joined us, was making an effort to engage with topics that didn't relate to his business interests. The growth was mutual. I was learning to extend grace to people I'd previously written off, to recognize that their flaws came from their own fears and limitations, rather than deliberate cruelty. It didn't excuse the hurt they caused, but it made forgiveness possible. 2 days later, I was in my office reviewing applications for the Los Angeles location when David knocked on my door. The Times critic is here for his reservation, he announced. And there's something else. Your James Beard nomination was announced an hour ago. Congratulations, Chef. For a moment, I just sat there, processing the news. A James Beard nomination. It was one of the highest honors in the culinary world, recognition from my peers that my work mattered. "Thank you," I said finally, feeling oddly calm. "Let's make sure Mr. Chen has an exceptional meal tonight." As David left to attend to the critic, I called my parents. "Maya," my mother answered on the first ring. "We just saw the news online. A James Beard nomination. We're so proud of you." "Thanks, Mom. It's pretty incredible." "We're telling everyone," my father's voice came through on speaker. "Margaret Whitley is beside herself with envy. Her son Marcus is still trying to get into medical school." I laughed despite myself. Some things would never change, and maybe that was okay. "Are you nervous about the critic tonight?" my mother asked, her voice taking on the concerned tone she'd used when I was young and facing a difficult test or presentation. "A little," I admitted, "but mostly excited. This is what I love doing." "Well, we have complete faith in you," she said. "You've built something remarkable, darling." After hanging up, I made my way to the kitchen, where the evening prep was in full swing. Chef Santos was running through the specials with the line cooks, her commands precise and encouraging. The kitchen operated like a well-oiled machine, every person knowing their role and executing it with skill and pride. "Ready for tonight?" she asked as I joined her at the pass. "Always," I replied, tying on my apron. "Let's cook." The dinner service was flawless. Every dish that left our kitchen was a testament to the vision I'd had 4 years ago when I'd first imagined this space. The critics' table received extra attention, but not in a way that compromised the quality of service for other guests. That balance maintaining excellence for everyone, while rising to special occasions, was something I worked hard to instill in my team. As the last dessert course was served and the dining room began to empty, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Not just because of the nomination or the critics' presence, but because of the life I built around this work. I loved Isabella's approach as I was reviewing the evening's numbers. "Your family just walked in," she said with a grin. "There, asking if you have time to see them." I looked up, surprised. It was nearly midnight, well past my parents' usual bedtime. "Send them back," I said, curious about what could have brought them out so late. They appeared in my office doorway, looking slightly uncertain. My parents, Tyler and Jenny, and surprisingly, Sophia. All of them were dressed more casually than I'd ever seen them in public, like they'd thrown on clothes and driven straight here. "What's this about?" I asked, gesturing for them to sit. "We came to celebrate," Tyler announced, producing a bottle of champagne from behind his back. "The James Beard nomination is huge, Maya. We couldn't wait until Sunday to congratulate you properly. We brought Korean fried chicken from that place you recommended," Jenny added, holding up several bags of takeout. "We thought we could have a late-night celebration here if you're not too tired." Looking at their faces, genuinely excited, proud, and eager to share this moment with me, I felt something shift inside my chest. These weren't the people who had dismissed my dreams 4 years ago, or even the ones who had criticized my restaurant 3 weeks earlier. They were family members who were actively choosing to celebrate my success, on my terms, in my space. "I love that," I said, meaning it completely. We spread the takeout on my office table, mixing Korean comfort food with the bottle of champagne Tyler had brought. As we ate and talked, I realized this was what I'd been hoping for all along, not their approval of my choices, but their willingness to meet me where I was. "I have some news," Sophia announced during a lull in conversation. "I've decided to postpone the wedding." The table went silent. "Not cancel," she clarified quickly, seeing our expressions. "Postpone. I need some time to figure out who I am outside of other people's expectations." James ... wasn't happy about it. "We're taking a break. How do you feel about that?" I asked. "Gently, terrified," she admitted, but also relieved. "For the first time in months, I can breathe properly." "What will you do?" my mother asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I don't know yet, maybe travel. Maybe try working with a nonprofit. Maybe take some art classes. I used to love painting before I decided it wasn't practical enough. That sounds wonderful, I said, and meant it. Actually, she continued, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, I was wondering if you might need any help with the LA location. I know I don't have restaurant experience, but I'm good at project management and legal logistics. I could work for you while I figure out what I want to do long term. The offer surprised me. Are you serious? Completely. I want to be around people who are passionate about what they do. I want to learn what that feels like. I considered the proposition. Having Sophia involved in the LA opening would be complicated. Family and business always were. But it would also be an opportunity for us to rebuild our relationship while working towards something we both cared about. Let me think about it, I said. There would be conditions. You'd be an employee, not a partner. You'd have to prove yourself like anyone else. I wouldn't want it any other way, she replied, as the night wound down and my family prepared to leave. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging that extended beyond the walls of my restaurant. I'd built an incredible professional life, but I was finally beginning to rebuild the personal connections that made success meaningful. My father, the last to leave, paused at my office door. Maya, he said, his voice unusually soft, I owe you an apology that goes beyond what I said at dinner that night. I was wrong to try to impose my definition of success on you. What you've built here, it's extraordinary. Not because it's profitable or prestigious, but because it's authentically yours. Thank you, Dad. That means a lot. I'm proud of you, he said simply. Not proud of your success, though that's wonderful too. I'm proud of your courage. After they left, I stayed in my office for a while, processing the events of the evening. 6 months ago, I would never have imagined my family gathering in my restaurant at midnight to celebrate my nomination with Korean takeout and champagne. The changes felt almost surreal in their completeness. My phone buzzed with a text from Chef Ray's, the mentor who had first encouraged me to pursue culinary arts. Saw the James Beard news. Knew you had it in you from that first Korean corn dog. Proud of you, Chef. I smiled, thinking about that frightened business student who had handed him her card all those years ago. She'd had no idea what she was capable of, what she could build with enough determination and willingness to disappoint the right people. The next morning, I woke up early and drove to the farmer's market in Union Square, a weekly ritual I maintained even as my restaurant grew busier. There was something grounding about selecting ingredients myself, talking with the farmers who grew our produce, staying connected to the source of everything we created. As I was examining a display of spring vegetables, I heard someone call my name. Turning, I saw Rosa Santos, the woman who had been our housekeeper when I was growing up, who had first taught me to cook with love instead of just technique. Maya, she exclaimed, pulling me into a warm hug. I heard about your restaurant. I'm so proud of you, Mia. Rosa, it's so good to see you, I said, genuinely delighted. How did you know I'd be here? Your mother told me you come here every Saturday morning. She's been bragging about you to everyone who will listen. This surprised me. My mother had been bragging about me? She showed me the pictures of your restaurant on her phone, Rosa continued. It's beautiful. But more than that, she told me you're still cooking with your heart. That's the most important ingredient, remember? I remember everything you taught. Emmy, I assured her. In fact, one of the dishes on my menu is inspired by those Sunday afternoons we spent making dumplings together. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. You honored me in your cookbook, too. I read that chapter about learning to cook from the heart. It made me cry. You gave me my foundation, Rosa. Everything I built started in our kitchen with you. Your abuela would be so proud, she said, referring to my grandmother, who had passed away when I was in college. She always said you had the gift. We spent another 20 minutes catching up, and she promised to come to the restaurant soon so I could cook for her As I watched her walk away, I felt a deep sense of completion. The circle was closed and the people who had believed in me from the beginning were witnessing the fulfillment of potential they'd seen before I'd even recognized it myself. 3 months later, I stood in the gleaming kitchen of Meridian, Los Angeles, watching Sophia direct a team of contractors installing the final pieces of equipment. She'd thrown herself into the project with the same intensity she'd once brought to her legal career, but with a joy I'd never seen in her before. "The health inspection is scheduled for Tuesday," she reported, consulting her tablet. "The final. Permits came through yesterday, and the staff training starts Thursday." "You've done incredible work here," I told her, meaning it. "This opening is going to be seamless because of your organization." She beamed at the praise. "I love this, Maya. I actually love getting up and coming to work." I'd forgotten what that felt like. The LA location was larger than our Manhattan restaurant, with an expanded menu that included more Korean-Mexican fusion options to reflect the local food culture. I'd hired a local chef de cuisine, but I'd be spending several months in Los Angeles, oversee the opening, and establish the restaurant's culture. "Any regrets about James?" I asked as we walked through the dining room, checking the final setup. "None," she said without hesitation. "Calling off the engagement was the smartest thing I ever did. I would have been miserable, and he would have been married to someone who was pretending to be happy. Neither of us deserved that." "What's next for you after we get this place running smoothly?" "I've been thinking about that," she said, pausing to adjust a flower arrangement. "I might want to open my own place eventually. Not a restaurant, maybe an event space or a gallery. Something that combines my organizational skills with something more creative." "That sounds perfect for you." "I'm also thinking about going back to school, maybe studying arts administration or nonprofit management. I want to do work that feels meaningful, not just profitable." As we finished our walkthrough, I felt immensely proud, not just of the beautiful space we created, but of the sister who had found the courage to rebuild her life from scratch. It hadn't been easy for her to walk away from everything safe and familiar, but she'd done it with grace and determination. That evening, I stood on the restaurant's outdoor patio, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline as the sun set behind the mountains. My phone rang. Tyler calling from New York. "How's the final prep going?" he asked. "Everything's on track." "Sophia's been amazing. I couldn't have done this without her. She seems really happy, different than I've ever seen her before." "What about you? How's the neurosurgery program treating you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Actually, I've been thinking about what you and Sophia have done, pursuing what actually fulfills you instead of just what looks impressive. I love medicine, but I'm not sure neurosurgery is the right fit for me." "What would be the right fit?" "Maybe pediatrics. Maybe family medicine. Something where I can spend more time with patients, build relationships instead of just performing procedures." "Those are beautiful specialties, Tyler. Very needed." "Dad won't be thrilled about the salary difference," he said with a nervous laugh. Dad learned to be thrilled about his daughter owning a restaurant instead of working in finance, I pointed out. He can learn to be thrilled about his son choosing medicine that feeds his soul instead of just his bank account. "When did you become so wise?" "When I stopped caring more about other people's approval than my own happiness." After we hung up, I remained on the patio, thinking about how much our family had changed in just a few months. Not just in how we related to each other, but in how we'd each begun to prioritize authenticity over approval. My mother had started taking art classes again for the first time since college. My father had begun volunteering at a financial literacy nonprofit, using his business skills to help immigrants start their own enterprises. Each of us was finding ways to honor both our practical skills and our deeper values. The next week, Meridian Los Angeles opened to packed houses and rave reviews. The food critics praised the innovative menu, the seamless service, and the way the restaurant captured both the sophistication of fine dining and the warmth of family cooking. But the review that meant the most to me came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Kim from the Queen's restaurant, where my family and I had our weekly brunches. She'd flown out to Los Angeles specifically for the opening, bringing with her a jar of kimchi she'd made using techniques her grandmother had taught her in Korea 70 years earlier. "This is for your new kitchen," she said, pressing the jar into my hands. "Every kitchen needs a grandmother's blessing." As I accepted her gift, I thought about all the grandmothers and mentors and teachers who had shaped my journey Rosa with. Her patient instruction, Chef Reyes with his professional guidance, Mrs. Kim with her embodiment of cooking as an act of love. That night, after the last customer had left and the staff had finished cleaning, I sat alone in my new restaurant kitchen, savoring the quiet satisfaction of a dream realized twice over. In my hands, I held advanced copies of my cookbook, which would be released the following month. I opened to the dedication page. "To every person who has ever had to choose between what others expected and what their heart demanded, may you find the courage to disappoint the right people and the wisdom to surround yourself with those who celebrate your authentic self." 8 months later, I was back in New York, standing in the kitchen of the original Meridian, preparing for the James Beard Awards ceremony. I've been nominated in the Outstanding Chef category, competing against culinary legends I'd admired for years. My family would be there, of course. My parents had bought a table and invited Rosa, Mrs. Kim, and several other people who had supported my journey. Sophia was flying in from Los Angeles, where she'd been managing the restaurant's expansion into catering and special events. But win or lose, I knew I'd already achieved something more valuable than any award, a life that felt authentically mine, relationships rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect, and work that continued to challenge and fulfill me. As I adjusted my chef's whites and prepared to leave for the ceremony, I caught my reflection in the kitchen's steel surface. The young woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the insecure business student who had walked away from her family's expectations 4 years earlier. She looked confident, grounded, and completely at peace with the choices that had brought her to this moment. Whether she won the award or not, she'd already won the only competition that really mattered, the one against the voice in her head that said she wasn't capable of building the life she dreamed of. That night, when they called my name as the winner of the Outstanding Chef Award, I thought not about the recognition or the validation, but about the journey that had brought me to that stage. Every difficult choice, every moment of doubt, every relationship that had to be rebuilt from scratch, all of it had been worth it for this moment of standing fully in my own success. As I accepted the award, I looked out at the audience and saw my family in the front row on their feet applauding with tears in their eyes. Not because I had finally achieved something they deemed worthy, but because I had never stopped believing in the worthiness of my own dreams. And in that moment, surrounded by my chosen family of colleagues and mentors, supported by the biological family who had learned to celebrate rather than constrain me, holding an award that represented the recognition of my peers, I knew I had found exactly what I'd been searching for all along. Not their approval, but my own. Not their definition of success, but mine. Not a life that looked impressive from the outside, but one that felt authentic from within. The girl who had been called worthless at lunch had become a woman who knew her own worth. And that transformation was the real victory, more valuable than any award or recognition could ever be.